Hello, everybody. It is Friday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, assistant sports editor for multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined for our relaunched Penn State football podcast ahead of the new season by Joel Haas, who is the football editor at the Daily Collegian, my old job from a long, long time ago, and also our Post-Gazette intern. Joel, it's nice to introduce you. Why don't you tell everybody about yourself a little bit?
So like Adam said, I'm the football editor for the Daily Collegian. It'll be my second year covering the team. I'm from Northern Virginia, so out of state student. Grew up as a Virginia Tech fan actually, but I'm excited to join the podcast and get started talking about Penn State football.
Absolutely. We're going to be talking about some big picture stuff today. Can Penn State win in the playoffs, not just make them? I think there's an expectation that, around State College, around the state, that, this is going to be a pretty good team that's going to have a good chance to be in this expanded 12-team college football playoff field. But what happens once they get there, and what should those expectations be? We're going to get into that because, frankly, we don't have a ton to talk about because Media Day is not till this weekend. When players, coaches are going to be giving their spiel on the season ahead. Joel's going to be there. So we will be breaking that all down next week on the podcast. But today, going to keep it a little big picture. Before we do, just want to thank our sponsor. We're glad to have back for a second season here on the podcast, Voodoo Brewing and State College. Enjoy the world-renowned craft beer, delicious cocktails, and their almost famous lobster rolls at Voodoo Brewing State College Pub, located right off College Avenue at 322 in Route 322 at 201 Elmwood Street, State College. Voodoo Brewing Company, State College has something exciting going on every day of the week. Join them this fall on Mondays for weekly free play cornhole tournaments, or test your knowledge with the pub trivia every Tuesday at 6. Wednesday is their game night featuring board games, card games, and adult games. Every Thursday, your boy Dots hosts bingo, but this is not your Nana's bingo. Saturday, they will have the Nittany Lions and college football all day, and they finish things off on Sunday with their weekly brunch paired with Steelers, Eagles, Red Zone coverage. Can't wait to see you at the Voodoo Brewery Pub in State College. All right, Joel, I've been playing the new college football game a fair amount. I bought an Xbox just to get my hands on it because I played it a bunch when I was in college more than 10 years ago. It was a fun way to, engage with the sport, and now it's back. And I think the thing that has stood out to me the most is that it's still really hard to win the national championship, even if you make the playoff. You could still be 3-4 wins away. It's not like, in recent years where, hey, if you're in the Final Four, if you're instantly in a semifinal, you can play your best game of the year and be 60 minutes away from a national championship. That's kind of gone away. You got to be a consistently good team. You got to beat 3 or 4 good teams to get there. So my question for you is, do you think this Penn State team has the juice to win in the playoffs and not just get in? I think that's kind of the bar for a lot of people is, can Penn State get in the playoffs? But I look at their history. They've proven they can be one of the 12 best teams in the country. I think the question is, can they take a step above that? And just because the bar is being lowered for the playoffs, I don't know that necessarily is going to make people happy if you're losing in the first round and basically in the same spot in the sport where you were before.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point there. Even though the playoffs expanded, and one of the talking points of the expanded playoff is that it allows more access for teams. You're going to obviously see teams that have never made the playoffs before getting an opportunity, but doesn't necessarily make it easier to win a national championship. And I don't really think it does, just because now you have to win even more games if you do make it to the playoffs, because we've seen over the past few years, a team like TCU can have a good regular season, maybe get lucky in a semifinal game and then make it to the national championship, or a team like Cincinnati, a group of 5 school that can make it to the playoff. And you look at the 12-team playoff, now that path becomes even harder for a school like that to kind of sneak into the playoffs. And then you have to win, 3 or 4 potentially games to make it into the national championship game. So for Penn State, I think everyone's familiar with the statistic that I think 5 of the last 10 seasons or something like that, they finished in the top 12 and would have made the playoffs had it been a 12-team structure before. But, obviously never made it with the 4-team playoff, got pretty close a few times. Going back to your original question, can Penn State win in the playoffs? I don't think the current team, the way it's constructed, the roster, the talent level, everything like that, is capable of winning a national championship this season. I do think they can win games in the playoffs, 1 or 2 games, depending on kind of how it plays out. I know they're favored in 11 of their 12 games, with Ohio State being the only game where they're not favorites. And even that's a pretty small spread. just mainly because Penn State gets that game at home. I think it's just a few points right now. So Penn State, if they go 11-1, should probably secure a top, maybe the number 6 spot, we'll say, which would give them a home playoff game for the first round of the playoffs. And I think they could easily win that matchup. But then after that, it gets tricky. Just looking around the landscape of college football, you got teams like Ohio State, Oregon, Texas, who just have so much talent, who have stacked better recruiting classes than Penn State, and just have been there before and have kind of proven their ability, to make the playoffs and make national championship games and things like that. So I think for Penn State, realistically, it's possible for them to win a game, especially if they get a home playoff game, because the atmosphere, they talked about it a little bit at Big Ten Media Days. Pat Kraft and Franklin both talked about it, the potential of, a playoff whiteout and the kind of atmosphere that would be. And I think that would really give Penn State a big advantage if they were to host a playoff game. And I think they could easily win a game like that. But then moving on to the next rounds, I just don't know if Penn State has the ability to match up well against other teams. And another thing I go back to is just the struggles that Penn State has had against big teams under James Franklin, just the inability to, really beat top 5 teams with the exception of that one Ohio State game in 2016.
Well, yeah, I kind of want to get into expectations now. Are you setting, one win as the expectation and anything above that is gravy? Or do you look at, I'll be honest, I look at this roster and you have Nick Singleton, you have Kaytron Allen, you have Drew Allar, a guy that people have spent years being excited about at this point. Didn't quite live up to the expectations last season, but, it was his first year as a starter, and you'd hope that's the biggest step he's going to take, right, is from year 1 as a starter to year 2. Julian Fleming coming in, a guy Penn State missed on initially, but who can really upgrade this wide receiver core. Abdul Carter, All-American buzz. I mean, they have a lot of pieces, Joel, that you would think, on some level, you'd want to make some noise with this team while these guys are here, because you don't know when you're going to have a core that kind of pops up that's solid again.
Yeah, I mean, Penn State, I would definitely say they're kind of trending toward a peak right now, just given that 2022 recruiting class that had a lot of the guys that you mentioned with, Allar, Singleton, Allen, Denai Sutton, Abdul Carter, guys like that. They definitely have a lot of guys who are probably not going to be with the team next year. So this does kind of feel like, make or break year, do or die type of year. But I just look at the classes that they had after that with 2023 and then the 2024 class coming in this season. I don't know if they have enough. And again, they've had good classes. Everyone knows that Franklin's a solid recruiter, and got some good recruiters on the staff as well. But just compared to some of the other top teams in the sport, talent-wise, Penn State isn't able to match up. I mean, you look at the average class over the last 3 or 4 seasons, and Penn State's probably around 10 to 12, something like that. So talent-wise, they're not going to be able to beat their opponents just through talent. They're going to have to do it by out scheming them. And I don't know if they're capable of doing that. Again, a big question mark is Andy Kotelnicki, and maybe he's able to elevate the offense kind of above their talent level to kind of, punch above their weight class. But, until we really see that from him, I'm not sure if I'm, willing to predict that right now.
Yeah, Seth and I talked a lot about the wide receivers. I think that's going to be the big question in terms of skill, right? Because you've got the guys at running back. I think you've got the guy at quarterback. He'll have to prove more this season, but I think, if anyone's going to do it, it just feels like it's going to be Drew Allar. The question is he going to have the weapons to work with? And I think that's where Andy Kotelnicki really comes in. Can he get more out of that group than they did last season? Do you consider the Peach Bowl in this conversation at all? Joel, listen, it was a meaningless exhibition. You had a fair amount of opt-outs, but I've always said, well, that was the team that's going to compete this season, and they got beaten pretty badly by a very good Ole Miss team, that couldn't really stop their passing game. I mean, those are the guys that you're going to see. Do you look at that game and say, that's the kind of team Penn State's going to need to beat to advance in, like you mentioned, a home playoff game? It's not going to be a cupcake coming in there. It's going to be a very solid team. Or do you just say, hey, that game is from a different era. There's not a lot you can take from it. Who knows what the intensity level really was in the locker room after Penn State falls short again of its goals last season. I think it matters a little bit. I'll give my opinion first. Like I said, I would have liked to see them play better in that game. I don't think you necessarily have to win. But I think it was the way that they lost, the way that they approached, a matchup with a team like that. it's a little bit concerning. Now, granted, you're going to have 2 new coordinators in here, and it's going to be a whole different show. But, that's the type of game we would have liked to see Penn State win at the end of last season.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And the Peach Bowl, this year is going to be a playoff game. So, kind of looking at it through that lens, last year Penn State would have been in the playoff against potentially Ole Miss. But yeah, I mean, I think an important point to note is just the amount of opt-outs that they had. And not even the opt-outs, because there were, players who opted out, but then there were several players who started the game and then didn't play in the second half, or were kind of basically on pitch counts for that game. So it was a really limited team, and not only are you missing players, but you're missing some of your top players, the guys who are heading off to the NFL and things like that. So Penn State was definitely not at full strength for the game. And I think the difference would be if it was a playoff game, Penn State, I don't think you would see those opt-outs. I think those guys would have all played in that game and played, start to finish the full game, just because it's a playoff game and you have that potential of winning a national championship game. So I think that is one of the benefits of the expanded playoff. Because personally, I'm not a fan of the expanded playoff, which I think puts me in the minority. But one of the benefits I can admit is that it does give, or it does reduce the amount of opt-outs. I think players are going to be more willing to participate in these bowl games, knowing that they have a chance at the national championship afterward.
Yeah, I am definitely more so on the fan side. I think it opens things up, and I think it avoids, for what was most of the 4-team era, you had the team that was the top dog in the conference, and then other teams just didn't get nearly that oxygen. I think my big criticism of the 4-team was primarily the way ESPN treated it, and how it was like the only thing that mattered. I remember watching the non-BCS or the non-playoff New Year's Six games last year, including the Peach Bowl, but also including, the Cotton Bowl with Ohio State and Mizzou, and they just didn't talk about the game that was on their air at all. They went straight into breaking down the matchup of the playoff games. Hopefully there's less of that. Hopefully there's more talking about these games that lead into who's going to make the 12-team format, because it was just so frustrating to watch those teams at the top just get so much oxygen, not because I, was particularly invested in whether Penn State was that team that was the winning or anything, but because you want to see a little bit of diversity and not consolidation of the sport, which is why I think the 4-team era rot. Joel, I want to talk a little bit about the Big Ten championship game, because I think a lot of people are saying that the conference championships are not going to matter. Again, having done a couple playthroughs with the 12-team format, not having to play that first round game is a huge cheat code to me, and it's worth wanting to win the conference championship. The thing in the Big Ten now is that you no longer have the divisions. You have, the top 2 teams are going to meet in Indianapolis record-wise, and then by tiebreakers. Do you think the conference championship is going to be easier or harder for Penn State to win this season than it's been in years past? Because, there is a path, because you don't play Oregon, where you could go 11-1, but lose to Ohio State and lose the tiebreakers to both Ohio State and Oregon and end up not getting to go to the conference championship, even though you had that 11-1 season that seemed to be so elusive to Penn State for these years under James Franklin.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because you're getting rid of, the infamous East and West divisions where you had Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State playing each other every year. And if you're Penn State, at least recently, that's kind of 2 guaranteed losses. But now you kind of avoid that. You still get Ohio State this year, like you mentioned, but you avoid Michigan with, the loss of divisions. They also don't play Oregon this year. So I would actually argue, even though the 4, Pac-12, former Pac-12 schools that they're adding do raise the level of the conference, raise the level of competition, I would still say Penn State has an easier path this year than it has had in the past. This is probably Penn State's easiest path to the Big Ten championship game in a long time, probably since they made it to the Big Ten championship game against Wisconsin back 2016-17. So yeah, I think just the way the schedule played out this year, and based on what we've seen from Penn State historically under James Franklin, where they're able to beat the teams that are worse or underdogs, and then they lose to the teams that are favored to beat them. I think if they continue that trend, they'll finish this season 11-1, which in years past we keep hearing the 10-2, Franklin always getting stuck kind of behind Ohio State and Michigan in the standings. Or maybe getting upset by another team. But for the most part, you've seen Penn State kind of struggle against Ohio State and Michigan, and avoiding Michigan this year, avoiding Oregon, like you mentioned. I think kind of clears a path for Penn State to an 11-1 season, which would potentially put them in. I mean, I believe Ohio State and Oregon play each other during the regular season, so one of them will have a loss, and I think it would come down to tiebreakers if Penn State finishes 11-1. But that's still an easier path than years past against both Ohio State and Michigan.
It's just scary though, Joel. I mean, yes, it's technically an easier pass, but can you imagine how furious people are going to be if Penn State finally gets over the hump, wins 11 games, and still doesn't get into the conference championship net game? Now, granted, at 11-1, you're locked to get into the playoff, probably get a nice home game, a nice matchup. But boy, yeah, it just feels like Russian roulette, where at least in the East Division, you kind of controlled your own destiny, right? And you kind of eliminate Michigan and Ohio State from your path. And then once you got to the conference championship, the East won every year, and so all of your big games, were in the regular season. So I wonder how it's going to play out, because you're right. They could go 11-1, win the tiebreaker. We don't have to have this conversation at all, but they could lose that tiebreaker and people could be infuriated that they don't get a chance to play for that playoff bye, which is why, people would argue you should take care of business against Ohio State at home, finally. One other thing I just wanted to say, I'm a little, I think it would be better for Penn State program-wise if you had Michigan on the schedule this year, because they're coming off of losing a lot of guys from that national championship team, most of their starters on offense. I think this is a year you would have liked to see Michigan, maybe see them in September, and get that monkey off your back a little bit nationally. I think that would give you some needed buzz. But I think you'd rather avoid Michigan in maybe one of these subsequent years where they're not reloading. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out with the Wolverines as well. You mentioned the Pac-12 teams that are joining the Big Ten this season. Does facing, 3 out of the 4, USC, UCLA, and Washington, does it give Penn State any kind of advantage if it has to play against an Oregon for a conference championship? Just because they'll get used to preparing for these new teams week in and week out, and maybe other teams wouldn't necessarily get that advantage. And then when you get to face Oregon, you're kind of used to the rigmarole of gearing up to face these new teams in a way that maybe other people aren't.
Yeah, I mean, so I actually think that Oregon, out of the 4 Pac-12 schools, is the best suited to transition to the Big Ten, because they've done such a good job recruiting in the trenches. I think they're really, stout offensive, defensive lines. And so I think they kind of match up with the traditional Big Ten teams better, as opposed to like the Washington, USC, UCLA, who I think, a little bit more pass heavy, maybe a little smaller linemen, things like that. So for Oregon specifically, I think it'll be a little bit different than any of the other Pac-12 teams that Penn State faces during the regular season. So I think if you're Penn State, you're kind of lucky to avoid Oregon this year. I think they'll be one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the sport this season, and get the other 3 teams, and we've heard from some of the players, kind of their excitement. Actually, I know Devon Ellies was talking about, getting to host Washington and UCLA at Beaver Stadium, how they're going to have to get used to the cold. And he was kind of talking about, how he anticipates them struggling to kind of adapt to the changing weather and the environment and things like that. So he was excited. He was really excited to get them in Beaver Stadium. But as far as preparing for Oregon, I think just Oregon has kind of elevated itself to a tier above the other Pac-12 teams, where it is good enough in the trenches to be competitive in the Big Ten. So it's kind of different than the other Pac-12 teams. So I don't know if Penn State will be necessarily prepared for a potential matchup against Oregon.
Yeah, I think it would just – do you think it helps to face those teams more than facing Indiana, Michigan State every single year? I think that'll be interesting to see play out, and if it helps them preparation-wise. Or, it'll be interesting to see if things cut the other way and one of these Pac-12 teams finds a way to trip Penn State up because they throw some things at Penn State that they don't traditionally see. Joel, did you hear anything at Big Ten Media Days that intrigued you and that you're possibly looking forward to hearing more about this weekend at Penn State's local media day?
Honestly, I didn't think there was too much importance said. It was kind of a whole lot of nothing. James Franklin does a really good job of that, where he talks a lot but doesn't really say anything. I think the biggest takeaway that I got from Big Ten Media Days was just that Abdul Carter will be kind of transitioning more of a hybrid role between linebacker and defensive end. He previously switched from linebacker to defensive end, but now Franklin went back on that and said he'll be on a week-to-week basis, kind of going back and forth which makes it a little bit harder to game plan for opponents, which is kind of a benefit for Penn State just because he's your most dangerous player on defense, and having that extra element of uncertainty where it's harder to game plan for him makes him even that much more dangerous. So I think, that kind of benefits Abdul. But yeah, as far as, notable things I heard from Franklin, I didn't think there was too much important stuff being said. A lot of it was kind of just recapping things that we already knew because there were, media members from other schools that were asking him questions that the Penn State beat members already knew that we've already asked him, but they weren't aware of. So a lot of it was kind of just recapping things that he's already said.
Are there any guys you're looking forward to talking to at Penn State Media Days, specifically guys that, maybe we didn't get to hear much from in the spring or haven't heard about what they've been up to all summer? Because this is really the Christmas day for reporters at Penn State, where you get access to pretty much everybody for the only time all year. Otherwise, there's you get whatever group of 4 or 5 guys Penn State gives you for the rest of the season. Are there any guys on your list that you're walking up to first?
Oh yeah. No, I mean, it's great because you get the entire roster pretty much except for the freshmen, but you can choose whoever you want to walk up to. And, there's way more players than there are reporters. So you can usually get kind of a one-on-one and really get a chance to kind of dive in. But yeah, one guy that I'm excited to talk to is Aldavian Collins, cornerback who transferred in from Mississippi State, not this offseason, but the offseason before. And I think he's a really interesting case. Franklin actually brought him up at Big Ten Media Days as a player to look out for that he thinks nobody's talking to. So, all right, if Franklin, said, I don't think anyone's talking about this guy, well, I'll go ahead and go talk to him at Penn State Media Day, kind of figure out what's going on there. Obviously, it's kind of a crowded room at cornerback and a deep room as well, bringing in other transfers, A.J. Harris, Jalen Kimber, and then the guys that you return as well. But Franklin has brought him up now multiple times as a guy that he thinks is kind of underrated heading into next season. And he was a guy that last year I thought could maybe make an impact, didn't end up seeing the field really at all. So I'm kind of interested to see what Penn State gets from him this season, how much of a contributor he can really be this year.
We'll look forward to hearing your thoughts on him and everyone else at Big Ten Media Days, or excuse me, just regular Penn State local media days. I'll get you out of here on this, Joel. I didn't get a chance to talk about this on the podcast because we weren't really taping for the last couple of months since Seth graduated. What did you think of the whiteout decision? I think that this is Penn State's biggest rival now, is the Fox television network, which has been trying to shoehorn the biggest Penn State games into noon and kind of force Penn State's hand into giving them the spectacle of a big noon whiteout. Penn State reluctant to do it for, what is this, the 3rd or 4th consecutive year? They're saying, nope, we're not giving this to you, Fox. Sorry. I know they were very complimentary of Fox, at Big Ten Media Days, both Pat Kraft and James Franklin. But do you sense that there's any kind of resentment of this big noon culture that Fox is trying to cultivate in the Big Ten, which is, I think, antithetical to what not just a lot of Penn State fans, but I think a lot of Big Ten fans like to see their teams in primetime too?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's pretty hilarious, honestly, that Fox will repeatedly take Penn State's biggest games, put them at noon, kind of, and then Penn State will retaliate by saying, well, you know what, we're not going to give you the whiteout. And then obviously, when they're in public, they're going to be, saying nice things about each other, but behind closed doors, I think they hate each other. And I think it's kind of funny that they kind of refuse, neither side really is giving any ground up there with, Fox refusing to give Penn State its biggest games at night, Penn State refusing to give Fox the whiteout. But, given what Penn State was dealt, Ohio State game being at noon, obviously that would have been the easy number one choice. But I think if you eliminate that, I think Washington is probably the second best option. So I do think Penn State made the right decision there just because, they played in the national championship game last year. So they still bring that kind of prestige of, one of the top programs in the sport, even though they're losing pretty much everything. I mean, all their coaches, all their players, everything like that. And so for Penn State, it should be a very winnable game, but also a game that comes against a pretty marquee opponent, and an opponent that you have some recent history with, the bowl game and everything like that. So I think that does bring some juice to Penn State. And it's also going to be fun, I think, just to have Washington experience a whiteout for the first time, kind of a welcome to the Big Ten moment. Here's a whiteout against Penn State.
Yeah, I just wonder why Fox is like, listen, I understand the whole concept of taking a game you expect to lose to the SEC in terms of the ratings battle and sticking it at noon. And I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with Penn State, West Virginia happening on Big Noon Saturday, because if you try to put that game up against a couple of ranked SEC teams or whatever, Alabama has going on in week 1, I can see the problem with that. I don't believe that Penn State, Ohio State is going to lose the ratings battle, in a whiteout game. That's the game that the whole country is going to be watching. Why can Big Noon not be flexible enough to say, all right, this week we're going 8 p.m. And we're going to go head to head, and then we're going to go back to the Big Noon slot next week. And they'd only have to do it like once a year, because we know they're going to play Ohio State, Michigan at noon anyway, because that's the traditional spot for that game. I'd like to see them find a common ground where you can accommodate having Fox get the whiteout, but also not playing it at noon. I also had this question. Do you think that Washington game is going to be a night game? Because it's November. It's not like, November 1st. It's November 9th. It's the following week. It's going to be starting to get pretty cold. And traditionally, the Big Ten does not like to have those games, primetime night games in Big Ten stadiums in November. I think that's changing a little bit. But, do you think that's going to be more of a 3:30 slot that bleeds into the nighttime but kicks off during the day? Or do you think they're going to do what they have to do to get that game on NBC at night?
Yeah, I think it was Audrey Snyder who reported that it wouldn't be a noon game. It would either be 3:30 or 7. So we know that, regardless, it'll be at some point dark. And anyone who's been to Penn State knows that, 3:30 p.m. in November, it's probably already getting dark. So the second half of that game will probably be pretty much a night game anyway. And that's really what Penn State's aiming for, just that visual aspect. It looks great on TV. It looks great for any recruits who are in attendance, just having the black sky with the white, all white, jersey, shirts, everything like that, clothing. But yeah, I think regardless, 3:30 or 7, you're still going to get at the very least half of the game played, in the dark. And so Penn State still kind of, even if they get stuck at 3:30, it'll still have the same kind of impact, I believe, as, a 7 or 8 p.m. kick. So regardless of, what the kickoff time ends up being, I think Penn State will be okay there from the visual aspect.
We'll be interested to see how that plays out. We'll be interested to see what you get from Big Ten Media Days, Joel. Looking forward to having a little more nuts and bolts to talk about next week. Get more individually focused, talk about some of these players that we're excited to see in 2024. Joel, thanks for stopping by. Everyone else, please stay tuned to the channel. We're going to have a lot more from Steelers training camp. Christopher Carter's on the North Shore Drive later today on Friday. We're going to have lots of content all weekend coming in from the guys out at camp: Jerry Dulac, Brian Bacco, Ray Fittipaldo. So make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you like the video if you enjoyed it. Help us out in the YouTube algorithm. We always appreciate that. We will talk to you again next week.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.